Welcome, everyone, to Women of the Military podcast. I'm really excited to talk to Crystal today about her experience in the Army. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you for Amanda for having me.
So, let's start with why did you decide to join the military?
So, why I decided to join the military? First, I'll start off and be honest. I was bored. I was used to running track for high school and college, and I came home from college. I graduated. I didn't have any college debt because I went on a full track and field scholarship. So, I like not having the college debt. I knew I needed additional schooling, but I was so used to training and competing, and I just had a lot of free time. And I ended up working a job for a little while that was really not really, I really didn't have much going on. It was a job that I was working in between on the summers, and I went right back to that job when I graduated, and I was just like, yeah, this is not, really working out. And I'm an only child, and my parents, I make the joke, they're enablers. They would have let me stay with them forever and not pay a bill. So I said, my good idea fairy said military, and I decided that I would join the military. And so initially I thought about the Marines, but they told me it would be a 6 month to a year wait, which I'm 20 minutes down the road from Quantico. So I couldn't really understand why it would take so long. But of course, after being a recruiting and serving, I really understand. But the Army allowed me to leave sooner. So that is how I started my Army career.
And so, did you enlist or did you become an officer?
So I did enlist. Initially, I took a bonus, and I also like the idea that if I wanted to try something else, I could always go from enlisted commission. But I knew that if I went commission first, I couldn't go the other way. So I wanted to go in and get some experience. I wanted to be a physical therapy assistant. They let me know that they were doing away with that at the time. So I came in as a healthcare specialist, of course, is the way they presented it to me. And then I showed up to training, and they said, "Welcome to the combat medic course." And I'm like, that sounds real GI Joe-ish, and I don't think that that's what I wanted to sign up for. So, but they told me the fastest way out of here is to graduate, so that is what I had to do.
So, what I know because you filled out the survey that you joined in 2001. So, when
Mhm.
in 2001 did you join?
So March 2001 is when I joined. So I went to basic training in South Carolina. They call it Fort Jackson, which they call Relaxing Jackson. And then I went from there to San Antonio, to Fort Sam Houston in the heat of the summer. And then I left there and went to upstate New York, into where it was 50 and 60 degrees, and they thought it was nice weather, and I was freezing. So to go from over 100 degrees to 50 and 60, I was freezing. But yeah, so I got there just before September 11th.
Okay. And so you went through your like basic training and at the time like it was peacetime and I don't think anyone was expecting anything to change and then everything did change. So what was was there any challenges that you faced during either basic training or your AIT that that you want to talk about? I mean, you talked about how you were like, "Wait, combat medic is not what I thought I signed up for," but besides that, was there anything else?
So like I said, I ran college track, and so I was in good shape. So the physical part for me wasn't a problem. However, a few things. I am a runner. I don't throw. I don't do any of that. Like, they wanted me to do all the sports when I was in high school because I was fast, and so they would try to get me to do all kind of things. I started out with basketball, and I went to track just to stay in shape for basketball. But then I varsity lettered as a freshman my first season out there, and I was like, "Yep, now going back to basketball." But they wanted me to do all kind of stuff. I'm like, yeah, I'm not a thrower and a catcher and all that kind of stuff. So the first experience was throwing grenades in basic training. My drill sergeant was like, I cannot believe how you do everything else. Like, you are a phenomenal runner. You, like, your push-ups are killer, your sit-ups are killer. He's like, well, you throw like a girl. Um, so my first experience, I believe I threw my grenade into the trees. So that was quite interesting. And they thought that they would have you say like the first three numbers of your social security number, which was also the first three numbers of the unit that I was in. So they thought that I was so nervous when I was saying my information, that I was saying the unit information when it really was my information. So that was a little bit of that. And when I showed up the basic training, I was a little bit of Private Benjamin. So I don't know if you watched the movie with Goldie Hawn's in it. She was pretty clueless when she showed up. And so I came to basic training with a rolling bag. I thought that I was smart. So I had wheels and I had all my things inside of there. And, I remember them yelling at me when I got off the bus, you brought it, you carry it. And I'm like, what are they talking about? No one else is rolling this bag except for me. And it just makes sense to roll the bag. It has wheels on it. So it started off quite interesting. I'm not easily excitable. So I overpacked and got all the things when you first show up because I didn't know we would have the opportunity to shop again. Purchased a really large laundry detergent that broke on the way. So when they had us pick our things up, my bag had bubbles around it because they just sprayed off the common area. And so I was just calmly wiping things down, like, okay. So a little bit of challenge there. I had a drill sergeant in the advanced individual training where you go for your tech school or your combat medic course, and he reminded me of Major Payne. So I couldn't stop laughing at him. Every time I saw him, I had like a smirk on my face, and he was like, "Just do push-ups every single time." So he got me really strong. I was up to like 78 or 79 push-ups in a minute and a half. So it led me to a competition where I was the only female out there doing that. But so yeah, I did have a little bit of challenges there. Didn't really want to get dirty, but I knew it was temporary and it was a means to an end. But I navigated that well, and then so those were those basic training AIT challenges. So pretty small challenges, especially for what I faced later on in my career.
Yeah. Those are, like, funny challenges, funny stories to hear, and I feel like everyone has a little bit of a story of, like, "I had no idea what I was getting into," and each one has, like, a different aspect of military life that surprised them, and so it's fun to hear your story. I've heard a few people mention Private Benjamin. I haven't seen the movie, but I've heard I know enough about it because of how many people have talked about it, so
Okay. Yeah. Goldie
yeah.
Hawn was hilarious in that movie. She just had no clue whatsoever. And like, I don't know if she thought that she was going glamping to summer camp or what she thought she was doing, but yeah. And so mind you, when I went to summer camp, my mother was one of the ones that worked at the summer camp. So I had a different experience with that as well. If I was too hot, I would go into her cabin with the air conditioning. So it was when she went home at night, if I didn't want to stay, I'm like, yep, I'm gonna go home at night with my mom and I'll come back in the morning. So yes, it was a very different experience for me.
Yeah, for sure. So you got to your first assignment, it was, like, in Northern New York, is that what you said?
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so you're getting settled. How did you end up like, did you like the job once you got trained to be a combat medic, or was it something that you weren't that excited about?
So they offered me to go to actually get the nursing identifier right before I graduated, but I was like so over being under someone's thumb, like being in training said it. I just wanted to get out of there. So it probably wasn't the best career decision move, being a new young service member. However, is what I chose to do. So I just wanted to get out of training. So I was like, yep, no, thank you. You could offer that to me weeks ago. I have my mind focused on graduating. Now I'm going to go to my first assignment. So when I initially went there, I was assigned to a Charlie Med, so a medical company, and we ran sick call. So we would, whenever the service members would come in for anything that was going on with them, we would see them, and so we would do the triaging and fill out the soap notes and things like that for the provider and prep them for the doctor to see. And that was okay. I didn't mind doing that part. I didn't love. We called it a tow room, so where all of our deployment stuff was and all our training stuff was, which was on the other side of the motor pool. I wasn't necessarily a fan of like being in the big warehouse. And so that was where all the medications were stored, all the tents were stored, all the Constantine wire, barbed wire to protect people, protect whatever our parameters were, all that kind of stuff. I wasn't a fan of that, but I really didn't do that very long because that same attitude that I had kind of transitioned into me being there. And so when I had my very first inspection, our senior leaders came into the room. They looked around and they said, very nice and clean, but we have a question. And I was like, yes, first sergeant. They're like, why haven't you unpacked? And I said, candidly, I don't plan on staying very long, first sergeant. And they kind of looked at me with the company commander and everyone like, what is she talking about? So I knew that I was going to find a way out of there. And so that's what I did. So the little bit of time that I was there, no, I didn't mind doing what I was doing because they ended up putting me on funeral detail. And so I was privileged enough to perform funerals where I folded the flag, presented the flag, and also did final respects for those that have served before us and or were serving alongside of us. And so that was what they had me do because they were just like, let's have a conversation. And so I did that most of the time that I was there. And so funny enough, I actually enjoyed doing that. I had a sense of pride in doing that. And so that was good for me. And we had way more free time and we got per diem for that as well. So that was good.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds like a great honor and a great responsibility, and
Yeah.
it sounds like you were pretty adamant about what you wanted, and so they were like, "Let's find something that she wants to do," and so that's really good. So, you said that September 11th happened pretty shortly after you got there, and you also weren't there for very long. So what was, like, the time frame with that?
So I got there in August, the end of August, and then September 11th happened like I would say a week or two later. So I either got there like the first week of September or like the very end of August. So it was about a week or two after I arrived there. And I remember being in the tow room that day, and they told us to come back to the company where we normally wouldn't go back until the end of the day to clean up and be released for the day. And we were told what was going on. And so I am from the Washington, D.C. area. I grew up in Fairfax County. And so right outside of the Pentagon, of course, that was nerve wracking because I have so many family and friends that are here. And so trying to get through on the lines, not being able to get through, but not really understanding the dynamics of the military at that time, and even how it was being presented to me that we wouldn't typically respond to things that are happening on our own soil. And so we thought that we may have been going. But those people have been there longer than I had been. So they shouldn't have been thinking that necessarily, but they still did present it that way. So we started like just making sure our things were in order for us to go. But what happened after that was a lot of deployments and a lot of training outside of that. So I went to JRCC in Fort Polk, Louisiana for the training to get prepared to go on deployment. I remember, I believe it was President Bush at the time. He came and like spoke to us, and everyone's cheering and like he's saying all kind of great stuff about pay raises and everything. And he's like, and by January or whatever the month was, he's like, this whole post will be empty. And we're like, "Mm." So like no one's really cheering, but then they're like, they have like you might as well say like the prompting for you to applause. They wanted us to applause, and so people are like, okay, yeah, like that's great news that we won't be here, we'll all be deploying. So that was that experience. But I was there for a little over a year.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I know that's the thing, you're like, nobody wants to hear that, that everyone's gonna be gone and that we're gonna deploy over to go to war,
Right.
that yeah. And that's like a big mindset shift of like where we were before. Even like you said, like people should have known, but people didn't really know because now we know like Title 9, Title 22, all these different numbers. I don't even know if I said them right, but we know like the different rules before military on our soil and overseas. But I think at the time we hadn't really learned that as a culture in the military, and so people were like, we don't know what's gonna happen, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So you were there for about a year and then you moved. So where did you go after that?
So I like I said, I wanted to get out of there so bad that I would like they used to be able to put it in like in our local newspaper or like in the military newspaper, like if you wanted to do a stateside swap with people. And so I put my information in the newspaper to do a stateside swap. And like so I was in the 710th MSD, which was the main support battalion. When they ran it in the paper, they ran it as like the maneuver support battalion. I'm like, that sounds very like challenging and tough. And I'm like, yeah, that's a big difference. I'm like, I don't know what that means, but it doesn't sound the most appealing. So no one's probably going to bite on that. So, needless to say, that did not happen. But I volunteered for recruiting, and they still had corporal recruiters around at the time. So E4s, I came in as an E4, and I was a specialist in the Army, and did a lateral promotion to corporal, which is a junior leader for the Army. And they were telling me the program didn't exist anymore. And I'm like, okay, but I see it out here, so I'm going to apply for it, and we'll see what happens. And so I actually ended up getting picked up for recruiting. So I was in the Army less than 2 years when I started recruiting.
Wow. Wow, that's really quick. Really
Yeah,
quick. I like that they were like, "You can't do that." And you're like, "Okay, well, I'm gonna apply anyways." And then guess what? They were wrong. That's another thing I've heard, like, on interviews is people say, "So and so told me I couldn't do this, and then I applied or I asked the question, 'Can I do this?' And I found out they were wrong." So, if someone tells you can't do something, you definitely should do your own research or apply and see what happens because you never know.
absolutely. People like to impose their own limitations on you, onto others, period. And so, yeah, I was like, well, this program, still, they told me it didn't exist anymore and all this other kind of stuff. I'm like, but it kind of does because the information's out there. So I filled out the application. Like I said, brand new. I walked over to like two levels up myself because I tried to do it the right way. They sat on it, didn't do anything with it. And I'm like, okay, I gave you all the opportunity. So now I'll do it myself. And I figured they probably thought that I was going to fail, but I walked over to see the O 06 by myself, and the sergeant major's like, the E9, he's like, so what are you doing here? And I was like, well, I have my packet and I want the the discom commander to sign my packet because I need this level of O 06 to sign it. He's like, well, let me look at your packet so you don't like, let's make sure you have everything. He's like, oh no, everything is good to go. And so he went to the administrative assistant and was like, put her on the calendar. And when I went in and talked to him, he's like, oh, have a great time in DC. I just came from there. And he's like, signed it off on the packet. And I just showed back up to my unit and acted like nothing was going on until my order came down. And they're like, how did you get orders? Not with your help.
I like that you were like, "Okay, I did the process that, like, I'm supposed to," and then they didn't do
Hmm.
anything, so then you were like, "Okay, I'm doing it. I'm going around these people." Yeah, that's another piece of advice. If someone's not willing to help you, then go to the next level, and you make sure you do what you're supposed to. Always go to the first level first, but then, sidestep it if you can and find other people who can help you. So that's so important because yeah, they were like, "No, no." You're like, "No, you don't understand. I gotta get out of here."
Yes, yes. And I think they thought that the funeral detail would hold me off because even after that conversation, they're like, come see me Monday morning. And I was like, okay. When I went to see them Monday morning, like, so you're starting funeral detail next month. And I was like, okay. I mean, that was great. But again, it was freezing cold in New York. Like we were 20 miles outside the Canadian border. They get lake effect snow. Um, you never hear people talk about like being excited about going to Syracuse. And so they were like, hey, we're going to the Q's this weekend. Like, who's excited about Syracuse? So that just tells you really. I'm like, this is not for me. So yeah, I had to get out of
I
there. I'm
like
not an ice fisher. I don't like turkey hunting or bear hunting or any of that kind of stuff. No, thank you.
you were like, "No, no." I think that's funny. So you went to recruiting, you were really young, but I feel like that also could be really a good thing. So you were
Mhm.
young, like in your military career, but then you had gone to college, so you weren't like, 20. You were older than that. So what was that experience like?
So I was barely older than that because I was 21.
Oh,
So she gave the hard stop at 20, but no, I was 21 when I graduated and when I went through and came to so I was probably about 22, 20, 21, 22 when I came through for recruiting, but I was doing well out there. The funny thing is that a lot of the kids thought that I was like a high school student. So they're like, or the teachers were like, oh, you need to go to class. And I'm like, but I don't go here. Like, I've already graduated and I'm doing other things. And they're like, even if I went to the courthouse to do court checks, they're like, so you're in JRTC? And I'm like, no. Or they're like, you're in ROCC? I'm like, no, I'm really in the Army. I don't just play it on TV. Like, I'm an actual service member. And so, people would give me a hard time about that. But the young people were attracted to like, hey, you know, like inviting me to parties and all kind of other crazy stuff. And I'm like, I'm not a teenager. Like, I'm not coming to your party. I just want to talk to you about the military and like, let's get your career going. And I'm not going to get in trouble hanging out with you. But yeah, I made E5 and E6 within my first 4 years of service. So I was fast tracking and recruiting and got all the gold badges and star sapphires and all that kind of stuff from my recruiting experience. So I really enjoyed recruiting. It was very close to being in a civilian type of setting, but also being in the military. So I like
yeah. I like that you're like, I looked really young, so people are like, okay, go to class. And you're like, I don't go here.
that.
That's
Yes.
funny.
Even my son was still saying in like his in my 30s, like people would say something. He's like, my mother is Miss Crystal. He's like, I understand she has teenager hair and teenager clothes, but she's Miss Crystal. Like, don't she's not your friend.
That's funny. That's really funny.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, but yeah, it sounds like you had like great success in being able to relate to the young people and get them, recruited into the army. Did you learn, you said that you realized like how the system works and why it like took a little bit longer if you had gone into the Marine Corps. So, what was like something that you really learned being or as a I can talk. What did you learn about the military being a recruiter?
So it wasn't like a private sector position where, of course, they have a vacancy, you do an interview and they fill it. Like, and it's going to happen within, of course, like the federal government doesn't even work that fast, even on the civilian federal side. However, they have certain time slots of the year for certain positions, and school dates start at a certain day. So basic training dates start at a certain time frame. So you can't just say, "Oh, I'm going to send someone now," because maybe there's not a basic training class starting right now, or the basic training class that's feeding into the type of training that you're going into. So whatever your job will be once you go into the military, those dates have to line up. And so you can't just say, "Oh, I'm going to send you for this." And so I noticed that even once I commissioned, there were dates. The commissioning dates were further out than the enlisted dates. So the enlisted dates happen more frequently than the commissioning side. And so that was why I would have had to wait on the Marine side because I was going in commission. But on the Army side, I didn't try to go in commission because they were telling me that it would be green. I think it might have been green to gold, and you could have you or OCS. I think that's what I believe it's OCS, but you would have had to pick like 10 things you're interested in. Well, that's almost everything that y'all have, like every field that you have. I'm not interested in 10 fields. So I'm like, I could have ended up in anything. And that wasn't appealing to me. I'm like, let me find where I have some control. And I like that I could pick to go into the medical field this way, as opposed to I said I want a commission and I end up a truck driver. Like I don't want to be in the motor pool like that, like or like messing with trucks or anything like that, or I end up being chemical or something like that. And nothing against any of that for anyone, but I needed more control over what I did. And so that was another reason I decided to enlist over commission.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's really interesting. You're like 10 things is a lot of things. It's a lot more than like 3. Like if you could narrow it down to 3, then you could be in like a general like, if you wanted to be in the medical field, you could find, 3 things. 10, it would be a lot harder and you might be like way outside what is actually medical and you're like that's not that makes a lot of sense. And that's good to know if you're like planning on joining the military that the time frames are based on like a lot of different factors. And so if you're looking to join the military, that's something that's why you have that waiting period of time and the difference between the listed and officer. There's so much dynamics and complexity.
There is much more than I'm just ready to go right now.
Yeah, I just think this is a great idea and I should join the military. It's like, yeah. Yeah,
Right.
there's a lot to it. There's a lot to it. Yeah, so how long were you said you were in recruiting for about 4 years, is that what you said?
So I stayed in recruiting. What do I say? So I don't know. Actually, I didn't stay in recruiting 4 years. I stayed in recruiting about three and a half, and then I recruited myself to commission. I found out that someone said I was doing a really good job and they recommended me to go to medical recruiting. I don't know who this person was, so if he hears it today, thank you. I still don't know. And they're like, "Oh yeah, he said you were doing a really good job, and he recommended you for medical recruiting. Do you want to come over?" And I was like, "Yes." So I took medical recruiting because I was like the unicorn of recruiting, and I went over and realized I met all the qualifications for a direct commission, which was much different than that other plan of the 10 things. It was like, this is what it is. Do you want to apply for it or not? And so I completed my packet and then I gave it to my peer whose mission it was in our station and had him sign his name so he could get credit. I got to commission and our station got credit. So I got picked up around 4.5 years. I got picked up a little over 4.5 years for commission.
I like that. I like that not only did you, like, figure it out, but then you're like, "Okay, you sign here so you can get credit, and then we can get it." And, yeah, that's really smart and not
Mhm.
because you could just leave it open and then no one would get credit, and they would just be like, "Yay, you're in the military." That's really cool. I love that. So yeah, direct commission. I didn't know about direct commission until I started doing the podcast. I thought it was like something from like World War II. And then I like interviewed people and I was like, oh, it's like something that you can still do if you meet the qualifications. So, how did you find out about it? Did you just stumble upon it or did someone tell you about it? How did you even know to look into that?
So one of my superpowers, I guess you could say, that I learned while I was in recruiting is the gift of research. And so that is like a big deal. That's a big part of the training that you go through. And although it's tedious and cumbersome and like challenging, I have used that skill to this day. And so once I start pulling back the thread on something, I just keep pulling and I find out all this stuff. And so I found out that, the Medical Service Corps officers 70 Bravo series or 67 Alpha for the Army, you could do a direct commission with your as long as you had a accredited degree. And I was like, so you're taking people off the street with their college degree accredited directly into this program. I'm like, well, I'm already in the medical field. I came in with my degree, and so I absolutely qualify for this. And so I actually had there was a he has since passed, but Sergeant Major Moran, very, very well known in the Army. They call him the old soldier. And I had him write a letter of recommendation for me. The commander that we had at the time, who was the commander of our medical organization, I had her write a letter of recommendation for me. So, and then like someone else that was within my within my recruiting area. And so I had the letters of recommendation to go along with it, and then my letter of interest of why I wanted to be an Army officer, and I compiled the packet that way. But so I found out about it being in recruiting. That wasn't my mission. My mission was to recruit those that were in medical school and were receiving scholarships. So the HDSP scholarship recipients for medical students that was my recruiting expertise when I came over to the medical side.
And so when you got the direct commission, did you, like, mainly just change your uniform and keep doing the same job, or did it switch your job? How did that all work?
So we actually got assignment orders to go to Germany. And so I got to Germany, and so I submitted the application. I was on the alternate list. I wasn't picked up on the primary list initially. I was put on the alternate list. We got to Germany. We went through the 1 month long process in processing in Germany. And then my husband gets an email, and he says, because we were doing military, and my husband says, "Hey, they reached out to me and want to know if you still want your commissioning. I'm sure that you want it, right?" And I was like, yes. So I showed up to my new unit as a staff sergeant E6 medic in a MP unit saying, "Yep, I'm getting ready to leave." So I actually started having school dates thrown at me to go to the NCO, like the non-commissioned course, for me to be at E6. And they kept sending me messages to go to Texas for that. And I'm like, I'm getting ready to commission. Like, if I didn't have a family, yep, I could take that TDY and go and fill this school, but I'm getting ready to commission. So it's like a moot point at this. So I showed up and I stayed with them for a little while. And then I went over to our G1, so our human resources at the highest level in Germany. I worked with them for a little while, and then I went to school to the basic course and came back to Germany as the executive officer of our clinic there in Mannheim, Germany.
Wow, that's a lot. I was like, you're
Yeah.
dual military, you're a parent, like, you got all these moving pieces, complicated military life. That sounds
Mhm.
about right.
So it was a matter of like there's a 1 day break on paper, but there was really no break. Like I went to work, I swore in, I just switched the rank from staff sergeant to lieutenant, and then I showed up and my pay changed. And so I was like, you can fix the housing stuff when I get back. And so it was a little unique. Although it happens, it was still a little unique. So it still kind of threw off our finance. Like they weren't sure about some things. I'm like, listen, just I know I can't be the first one that's done this, but even if I am, there's a way to do this. And I wasn't just overseas hanging out. So there's like stuff that you have to do because I was already overseas, and stuff you have to do to get me back overseas. So we were able to get that taken care of. But yeah, it was interesting to see people going from being enlisted over there, and then all of a sudden, even my friends, they would walk up to me and salute, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I have to salute now. Like we're in public, okay." So that was
Yeah, I
different.
mean, that's a big change.
Hmm.
And was your husband still enlisted? Or was
He
he an
was.
officer? Okay.
He was still enlisted, and so I was at E6 and he was at E7, and so that was different too because then he had people that were more senior to me that were his friends as well, and so having them salute when they didn't have to before, or having the people that you might have had some disagreements with in the past that were senior to you, like ducking you out, not wanting to salute. I'm like, I don't really care. My paycheck doesn't change because you don't want to do the right thing, and so whether you did the right thing or not, I'm still going to call you out on it, and I'm still going to move forward with it. So it was very different. But people, we would get the crazy looks like, what are they doing together? And I can, so did you guys meet in college? Nope, they just keep moving.
I had someone, who was enlisted and her husband was an officer, and they were I think they're in the Guard or the Reserve, I can't remember, and she said whenever they would have drill weekend, they would go and people would be like, "What's going on?" And she was like, "It's none of your business." Because it isn't, but it's just kind
It's
of funny
not.
that people ask questions, like, people strangers ask, like, "What's the story behind this?" And you're like, "It's none
Hmm.
of your business, and why
Right.
why do you care?" So,
Clearly we're doing the right thing because we haven't been put out. So I mean, if there
right.
was something like when you want to say it was fraternization, then we would have been separated. So I had a general that like we walked in the dining facility and I saw her looking, and then she like randomly says, I don't know her. She's like randomly, "Oh, did you guys go to college together?" No, and we just kept walking. Like, no, ma'am, thank you. And just kept going. Like, come out with your question so then I can tell you. But you know that your question is, like you said, it's not appropriate. So
Right.
you're like tiptoeing around the subject. So then I'll tiptoe around it with you.
Yeah. Yeah. So you were in Germany and you were dual military and you did you have 1 or 2 you had children or a child?
Right. So I have my own biological son, and my bonus daughter also lived with us. So we had two
Okay.
children with us at the time in Germany. And her mother was also in Germany and also active duty.
Oh my goodness. The
Yeah.
dynamics and complexity of military families, that's such yeah,
hmm
that's crazy. So did you get to, like, travel and see, like, Europe while you were in Germany, or were you, like, super busy and weren't able to get to see different things?
No, we went to Berlin. We went to an indoor beach there and like spent time there with the family. We went to Edelweiss, and so it's a very nice place there. We went to Czech Republic and did a little shopping there. We went to London and we saw Big Ben and some other things there. So no, we did get a chance to travel around a little bit.
That's so
Oh, we
awesome.
also went to Amsterdam. So we went to Anne Frank's house in Amsterdam.
Wow. It must've been really cool for, like, your whole family just to experience that and to live in a place different than, the United States. Just sounds so cool.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
enjoyed it.
So, how long were you there, and did you face any challenges or triumphs while you were over there?
So I was in Germany for 3 years. Right before it was time for us to return back to the States, they all of a sudden wanted to deploy me. And I'm like, so I've been here for 3 years, and now it's time for us to go back to the States, and it's time for my son to start kindergarten. Like, you can catch me another time. Like, you could have caught us before now. So um, I was able to navigate that space and go ahead and complete our return to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, which is, I guess, now Fort Liberty. And so, yeah, but that was a little bit of a like, okay, I'm getting ready to get out of here. And now you want to, like, you can't find anybody else to go. Like, you've seen me all this time. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a challenge because your whole family was, like, in the process of getting ready to move, and then they're
hmm
like, "Oh, we wanna send you," and you're like, "But I'm moving." It's a little too late, especially, like, as a dual military family, that would be really hard.
hmm
And so then you guys were able to move to North Carolina to Fort Liberty,
hmm
and what was your job when you moved there?
So I was in what they call TSC or old COSCOM. So I was on the non-airborne side, but my assignments branch manager didn't really understand that. And so when my husband asked about what us getting orders to go to Fort Liberty, they said I need to go to airborne school. So I was in airborne school at like 32 years old. So I went from 60 degrees in Germany to 100 degrees in Georgia,
You're a lot of, like,
but I didn't need to
extreme
go.
weather changes.
Yes, yes, but I didn't need to go to airborne school, but that was fine. I was happy to get it out the way. I wanted to go way early in my career, and it didn't work out for me to go. And so, in order for me to get that move, then I went to airborne school from there. And so, I started out on that side, and then I went over to the Warrior Transition Command. So, after the whole Walter Reed thing and all the services had to come up with their own medical transition units, then I actually went over and worked in one. And I worked as a chief of military personnel. I worked as a company commander, and so I really enjoyed that assignment. It was challenging, but I did enjoy that assignment.
That's awesome. And then, where else where did you go after that?
I volunteered to go to Korea. So I went on a hardship tour where I went unaccompanied for 1 year because I had not deployed. And so I was like, well, this is a way for me to kind of get that experience as well, which I'm not downplaying anyone's deployment, but I didn't do a deployment. So I went to the 1 year unaccompanied in Korea. And I also thought that I could do it because I lived in Germany and I was like, oh, this is great. Yep, Germany and Korea was a totally different experience. Um, so thankfully, my friend that I commissioned with actually ended up going with me as well. Although she was in San Antonio, we met and flew together to Korea. So she forced me to get my license. She was like, "You cannot be here and not drive. It's too cold." I was walking to work every day. She was like, "No, I'm going to the States for Christmas. You need to drive, and I'm leaving you my car. You have to get your license." So um, I was thankful to make it through that year, but I made it through the year with my church, like singing with services in my church, and then also doing things in my sorority and having my battle buddy that I commissioned with there with me.
Yeah. What was probably, like, the hardest challenge of being in Korea? Was it being away from your family or just being in a new culture? What was that
So
like?
yes, being away from my family, I had not like when we faced PCS before, I PCS with my husband, and my kids, like he knew all that kind of stuff. And so it was like, all right, we're going together, we're doing things together. So to get to Korea, I expect it to be assigned housing on the installation. And if you go there unaccompanied, depending on what part of career you're in and depending on what rank you are, you're not assigned housing on the installation. They make you find housing off. So I wasn't really comfortable about finding housing off at first, but once I got settled in, that was a better housing option than what they had at one post. But initially, that was a little bit challenging for me because I had to be out there by myself. And then they have curfew, so it was kind of weird. It was like, what's happening at this time of night? Is it like I am legend and like all this crazy stuff happening? Like, so your mind is like wondering. You had to be in your apartment, like not in your building. You had to be in your apartment or in your house before midnight or by midnight, or you would have problems. So it was a different experience, but there were some good things that happened there too. And I did allow my son to get a couple of weeks out of it to where he was able to experience it as well before I came back.
Oh, that's awesome. That's really cool. Getting to travel. I mean, that's so cool. So, yeah, I think there's always good and bad, especially when you're moving. Always something comes up and you're like, that wasn't part of the plan. And then it's hard if you're on your own and you have to figure it all out. So,
Hmm.
yeah. So you were there for a year, and then when you came back, where did you go after that?
So I went to Fort Belvoir, which they now named the hospital. I went to the hospital as the chief of military personnel, which they now named Augusta Medical. So that name has changed as well. So I was there for maybe a year or so, and then I went to the Warrior Transition Command, and so I worked at the policy level, and then I actually transitioned out of there unexpectedly.
Okay. Do you wanna talk about why it was unexpected and what happened?
Well, the Army was downsizing in 2016, and the Medical Service Corps, my understanding is they actually opted in. We didn't need to participate, but they opted in and they started selecting individuals to separate. So at this point, I had been selected to go to school fully funded for my second master's degree, where I would have been in a complete civilian status, getting all my pay and benefits, and then getting ready to get my look at promotion to major. And I would have been in school 2 years. So that board happened. I got picked up, and like a month later, the separation board happened. I got picked for separation. And then a month later, my first look at promotion to major happened, which of course was not done without bias because they put a notice in there saying that I volunteered to retire. And so I did an early retirement because you need to have at least 15 years in order to be considered for it. So thankfully, when I separated, when the whole thing came out, I had 15 years and 8 months. So I was able to walk away with something as opposed to empty handed and going home 4.5 years earlier than planned.
Yeah, that sounds like the military and complicated and like so many different moving pieces and a big abrupt life change. That's one of the things that I've talked about on the podcast is like you kind of have to always be ready for transition because you never really know when the military is going to throw something at you or you're going to get injured or who knows what's going to happen. Life happens. And so it's really important to, start thinking about it. But it sounds like I mean, it was unexpected and you were getting ready to go to school and get your master's, and then all of a sudden, like, everything changed. So what was that transition experience like?
The transition was a little challenging because at the same time, unfortunately, like I said, I'm an only child, but my cousins allowed me, like, we treat each other like brothers and sisters. And so one of my nephews, at 11 years old, who was a few months different in age from my son, actually died by suicide at the same time. So that was a lot to go through at that time. So my head was in a different space. Then when I retired in the winter months. So, everything slows down during the winter. And so I wasn't able to use my GI Bills to get that money coming in. They don't immediately pay you your check, so everybody needs to know that you don't immediately get paid. They have to do an audit of your accounts first to make sure you don't owe anything, and then they will pay you. I wasn't getting VA disability or anything like that because, of course, they have to go through all of that and decide if they're going to give you anything or not. So it was challenging, and so initially I was living off the credit cards because I wasn't planning to leave. I knew I had 1 to 2 more promotions in me before hitting that 20-year time frame. So that was a big shift in the plan. And then, so I did a little bit of substitute teaching. I worked a contract for like a month, and then navigating that process of hiring into the federal government because, as we know, people either run far away from it as possible or go to it. So the plan was to go to it, and they had a government hiring freeze the day that I retired. So just adding all of that on top of it, and so I was able to navigate the system and build on it and have strategy enough to get to senior federal level employment. Um, and then, of course, open my own business because I understand the difficulty that happened with transition.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you touched on so many things that people need to be aware of and prepare for transition. I think it's hard to transition no matter how how prepared you are, but I definitely think that, when it's unexpected, it makes it even harder. So, and then yeah, and then you add all these outside factors, hiring freezes and separation boards. I mean, that was like a crazy time when all that stuff was happening, and it really changed people's lives. And then another thing you talked about, like the gap between, like, you got out of the military, you got your final paycheck from the military, and then you're like, okay, I'm gonna get retirement, and then it's like, nope, I gotta wait. And just like disability, that takes a long time. I think between when I did my VA claim and when I finally got it was like 10 months just through
Oh,
the whole
wow.
process. I also did it, like, when the PACT Act happened, so there was a lot of claims, but, it just took time for me to get all the paperwork, and then it took me time to go to the appointments, and then it took time for them to come back with their decision, and I think, all those things a added together, and it just took a long time, and I think, that's just you people need to be aware that there's gonna be, like, that gap of time. I haven't Yeah, I've heard people have longer gaps, some have shorter gaps, and then no one really knows why. Nobody knows
Right.
why. It's not like you did everything right, so then it goes quickly. It's like, no, nobody really knows why. So, yeah, that's so important to talk about.
So fortunate for
So
me, because I worked in the
go
transition unit, mine did go a little bit faster. So I knew, although it did take a little while, I did know how to make sure that all my stuff was set up and it wasn't a back and forth. So by the time I retired December 1st, I had my first paycheck April 1st, and my results and claim total and permanent first time. So yeah, that did help. And submitting it before I separated, and so really taking that seriously. Where people are like, "Oh, I'm just gonna wait." No, like take advantage of before you separate the new systems that they have in place.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely take advantage because it does take time. It takes time for you to get your paperwork in order, and then it takes time for the VA to get all their stuff done. And yeah, and working, yeah, in transition helps you have a leg up. But that's like why those people are working in transition to pass on their knowledge to people. So
Hmm.
utilize, you guys as a resource as you're transitioning. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So it sounds like you went into federal government, but now you have your own business. So why did you decide to start your own business and what are you doing?
So I'm coaching and speaking, and I've also written two books. So I am assisting others with transition. So I understand the difficulties that we face when it comes to transition. There are all these beautiful programs out there. They have really, really nice names. They have beautiful colors and all these things. And then you try to apply that stuff and it doesn't work. So I love it and I appreciate that it's out there, but we really need it. Like that goes back to what actually happens boots on ground, what we know when we're actually doing the work, vice what there's writing in policy. Everything in policy doesn't always line up with what's on boots on ground. And so I think there is a disconnect when it comes to what's being written that sounds very good and what's actually working, because the resume that they give you a check the box on for separation does not get you into the federal government at all. So you're going to need to do some additional tweaking and guidance and using the resources that are out there for you to get to that next level to do that thing. And then it goes back again to people will tell you, oh, well, you were this rank when you were in, so you would only qualify for this grade. That's not true either. So just absolutely knowing the strategy and knowing what's available to you is important. So that is what made me get into speaking and coaching, because I needed someone like me during that time. And so I know what it feels like, and I know that it's still going on, especially when I ask other veterans, like, oh, so you filed your claim, right? And they're like, no, or, but I don't qualify or anything, or there's nothing wrong with me. I'm like, yep, that's the mentality that we've always had because that's what we were taught. It was frowned upon to go to sick call. And just understanding that part of it. And then like people being intimidated by the USA jobs and the hiring process. And they're like, I've been trying everything and it's not happening. You got to know someone. I'm like, I knew a lot of people, and I can tell you that one of them got me a job. It's really knowing how to navigate that system. So I found that to be very important. And so that is how I got into it. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean that stuff is so important, especially like the VA claim. I think disability people we were taught. I mean, that's we were taught like just suck it up. take some Tylenol, you're fine. Like, don't go to sick hall. It looks bad, and it's not. You're supposed to go to sick hall. If you're hurt, and injured, you need to get better, and you need to get taken care of. And especially, and mental health is so important. I think that's been a newer thing of like focusing on your mental health and how the military affects your mental health can also be really important. But you learn so much as a veteran, and you don't realize how much you don't know when you're on active duty, and then you get out and like you learn all these things. So it's awesome that you're adding to the knowledge that you had while you were in the service, helping you with transition, and now you have even more resources as a veteran, and so that's really great. Yeah. So if people want to work with you or want to learn more about what you're doing, what would be the best place for them to go to?
So they can find me across all social media platforms, every single one of them. Crystal, she speaks. And so you can send me a message. My Calendly link is on there. You can book an appointment for us to have a conversation to figure out more about you, for me to learn more about you. And then also, the only account that's different is well, no, they're all Crystal, she speaks. I was going to say even Facebook, but nope, they're all, everything is Crystal, she speaks. So if you don't find me there, if you Google me and you look up Crystal Tramack, it will take you to Crystal She Speaks. So, I'm on YouTube, IG, Twitter, Clapper, which is a lot of one that a lot of people don't know about, and Clubhouse and all of the things. So you can find me out there, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you and helping you navigate through the journey because I know what it's like. And whether it's me or somebody else, that you find someone to help you navigate through that journey to your federal employment, if that's what you want, to your benefits, to stop leaving that tax-free money on the table. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like you're such a great resource. So I will share some of your social media links in the show notes so that people can find them easy and connect with you. And then, is there anything from your time in the military or your transition that we didn't cover before I ask my final question?
No, because I think it can go so many ways all the time. So I think that we went through a lot. I love to be able to share different things that people may or may not know, or you'll get from different podcasts. They won't all be the same. So that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Or even what I'm sharing my own social media account. So I like, that there is a variation of questions and direction that it goes in. So no, we're all set.
Awesome. Okay, so I always like to end the interview with what advice would you give to a young woman who's considering joining the military? So what would you say?
So I would say if it's something you want to do, go ahead and do it. Knowing that there are some opportunities in there for you, so make sure that you take advantage of everything that's there for you. They are going to get everything they can out of you, so you might as well get everything you can out of them. So take ownership of your own career and don't allow it to just go with the wind. Now there are some things you don't have control over, but when you have an opportunity to speak up and take advantage of some other trainings or some other schoolings or whatever it is, make sure you're doing that. I always told those that were coming into the army early on, make sure you pay yourself first. So I don't care if you're making $500, $1,000, whatever, put $100 away or $500 away every single pay period because you've already been accustomed to not living off of that. And each time you get promoted, up that amount and put it to the side. So yeah, put something in your TSP, but also pay yourself and put it in a high yield savings. The same thing with just understanding that just because you're making it doesn't mean you have to spend it all. Because one day it's going to end. You're going to need to transition. So whether it's your choice or Uncle Sam's choice, it will happen. So make sure that you walk away with more than you came in with. And so that's what advice that I would leave.
I really love that. There's so many good pieces, especially like they're gonna take everything they can out of you, so you take what you can out of them because I mean you can get your schooling paid for, you can get training and you can get certification, you get all these things from serving in the military. So take advantage of those things and use that to your ability. And if even if you don't use it while you're on active duty, use your GI Bill when you get out. Use the benefits that you've earned and start taking advantage of them as soon as you can. So thank you so much for being a guest. Thank you for the work that you're doing to help with transition. It's so important that, you know, we get help as we transition. And I think there's so many unique challenges. So I'm really grateful for the work that you're doing and for being a guest on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for allowing me to share in your platform and for what you're doing as well.
Thanks.